Being a prophet is no easy job. Elijah, Jeremiah, and Jonah all expressed desire to have God end their life rather than continue serving in this demanding capacity. In fact, Isaiah is the only prophet in the Hebrew Bible who asks specifically to be chosen for the role of prophet. Isaiah 6:8 states that when God asked, "Whom shall I send?" Isaiah responded, "Here am I, send me." It is clear that Isaiah was by no means a typical prophet. The servant passages in Isaiah 40 to 55 possess a similar uniqueness, in that they differ from what one might expect of a servant of God. These servant songs were addressed to the exiles in Babylon, a people filled with despair. The last thing they needed was further chastisement. Consequently, the author of Isaiah 40 to 55 claims that the agony experienced by this new breed of God's servants has not gone unnoticed. Rather, the suffering has served an important purpose. In the following presentation by Dr. Hugh C. White, we shall discover that God's servant is instrumental in leading the people of Israel to righteousness.
Prophecy is the vital center of the divine-human relation in the Hebrew Bible. The prophet has the conviction, the passion, and the courage, and perhaps even the audacity to speak for God to God's people. The problem with prophecy is that its form tends to change as the circumstances of the people change. About the time the people have grasped one form of prophecy, it takes a different form. When the liberated slaves finally become comfortable with the prophecy of glorious promises, it changes into prophecy of judgment. The common thread running through these changes is that prophecy always upsets the fixed ideas of the people and calls them to respond in new ways to new circumstances. The prophet is always disturbing and controversial, and it is never obvious to the majority that the prophet is truly speaking for God. To recognize and respond to true prophecy requires a risk of faith. In the four servant songs of Isaiah 40 to 55, a radically new form of prophecy appears. While it is difficult to know whether the prophet is speaking of himself, of Israel, or of another person, it is clear he is speaking of a new type of figure through whom the message of God is coming to God's people and to the world. What is new about the servant? Well, the message of God through earlier prophets proclaimed God's judgment upon the people for their violation of the covenant. These prophets disturbed the people's confidence that God was always on their side and called them to repentance, warning of a future catastrophe if they did not radically change. The early prophets' view of history remained firmly anchored within covenant theology. God would ultimately reward righteousness with blessing and punish wickedness with failure and destruction. At the time the servant songs were uttered, the destruction prophesied had befallen the people. Their nation was in ruins, and they were in exile in Babylon. Their complacent self-righteousness had been shattered, and they were now filled with despair. The punishment had been so drastic that no future seemed left for them. How could they understand suffering that seemed to go far beyond the requirements of justice? Perhaps they were abandoned by God. They were saying, "My way is hidden from the Lord, and my right is disregarded by my God." With the people now fully in the grip of such despair, the prophet presents a radically new way of understanding their suffering that overturns their fixed ideas about God as a God of judgment, much as the earlier prophets had overturned their fixed ideas of God as a God of perpetual salvation and protection. The prophet speaks of one who was despised and rejected, held of no account, one we accounted stricken, struck down by God, and afflicted. That is, one whose failures and suffering seem to indicate, on the basis of the Old Covenant thinking, that he had been rejected or abandoned by God. The prophet is speaking of one who was in the situation of Israel in exile. But this one upon whom such suffering has fallen is not in fact rejected by God. Quite to the contrary, his suffering is perceived as redemptive. He is bearing the punishment for the sins of others. Surely he has borne our infirmities and carried our diseases. But how can suffering for another's sins ever bring justice? To answer this question, we have to turn to an earlier passage from the servant songs. And there we learn something else about this elusive servant of the Lord. He will not use violence in achieving his ends. He will bring forth justice to the nations, but a bruised reed he will not break, and a dimly burning wick he will not quench. Unlike the Messianic king, an older concept, the servant will not bring justice by killing the wicked with his commands. Now the prophet has begun to see that when the righteous seek to achieve justice through violence, it only leads to more violence. Those who are punished will not generally believe that they deserve the punishment they are receiving. So this perceived injustice will eventually cause them to seek revenge and vindication. And the cycle goes on endlessly, as history shows. One possibility for despairing Israel at this point would be to nourish quietly the fires of hatred until opportunity arose to take vengeance upon those who had brought this great tragedy upon them. While in other passages there is talk of divine vengeance upon oppressors of Israel, here in the servant songs, vengeance is at least in principle renounced at the human level, and a radically new path is envisioned. The prophet has seen that if the righteous person, rather than seeking to punish the sinner or get revenge for an injustice, actually bears the punishment for the sins of others, then the basis is laid for reconciliation between righteous and unrighteous. When the righteous take upon themselves the suffering and punishment of the unrighteous, then the age-old game of good guys versus bad guys comes to an end. The grace of such action holds the promise of transforming the heart of the evildoer and ending the cycle of violence perpetuated by revenge and punishment. Further, if it is possible now for the most righteous to suffer, it is no longer possible to look at a person's outer condition and tell whether he or she is righteous in the eyes of God. Now the person who is suffering the most may also be the most righteous. If the Lord's servant appears to us to be one struck down by God, then it becomes possible for God to be present in history through others who are similarly struck down. Thus, the prophet has disrupted the comfortable notion that it is easy to tell the difference between the righteous and unrighteous in this world. Things may not be what they appear to be to the righteous, as Jesus indicated in his teaching about the sheep and the goats. It is not surprising that the early Christian community turned to the servant songs to understand the crucifixion of Jesus, that made him also appear to be among those struck down by God. These servant passages are disturbing to some of our own ideas about punishment. They also upset the complacent notion still abroad today that God's favor upon our lives is proved by our own prosperity and success. In Isaiah, the servant passages point us to a path of radical compassion and reconciliation as the way out of history's tiresome and bloody cycles of violence. It is as needed today as it was in his own time, and just as difficult.